Nami orange, but yes, I had to put purple because it just looks well with the decor.
Totally fine. Look, obviously these are always really hard because it's such a disappointing way to see someone leave the game. Can you talk about a little bit like what led up to you finding yourself in this situation and when did you start to feel this pain, this numbness in your body?
Oh, certainly. It's a good question, right? It's the $1 million question. The cost me $1 million question, actually, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So to say, but so we had a really bad storm. And how I remember it was I was not doing too well in the storm. I remember we had a shelter collapse, but during that storm before the collapse, I was having a very hard time sleeping. I was had a little bit of food aversion. I was exhausted mentally. And I remember struggling to, I was starting to kind of like have a little bit of delirium. I'd like, it was dark. It's so dark there. And the storm is just like the worst storm I've ever experienced in my life. And I remember struggling to find a way to sleep. And I was really trying to sleep. And I was like seeing myself go in and out of sleep and a little bit, just kind of experiencing a little bit of exhaustion. And I remember feeling a massive pain behind my neck, and it was like like a lightning zap, if I could explain it. It's kind of bizarre, but and I remember just like feeling numb, and I tried to go to sleep, and I just like I'm just gonna push through. I'm gonna go to sleep, and when I wake up, everything's gonna be good. This nightmare is gonna be over. And I don't remember anything from the rest of the night other than that pain. I woke
Yeah.
up and my arm did not work, and I had what can only be described as like a sharp pain behind my neck. And I do remember not having any use of my arm whatsoever. And it's at that point I realized, okay, this is a bit much.
Yeah, I feel like you phrased that really well. It's the survivor dream becoming a nightmare in a moment and having to have those conversations. We see you having a conversation with like Dr. Will, and then Jeff comes out. What was the time frame? We know like Jeff spoke about it well, and super fans of Survivor know like you have medical checks pretty regularly, and it sounds like it's all really great on that end. Can you talk about what was the time frame between having that initial conversation with the doctors and then Jeff coming in and eventually deciding to pull you from the game? And did you have any inclination that that was going to happen, that you were going to be pulled?
So yeah, good question. So number one, at the challenge, yes, I did have an inclination that I was going to get pulled because of one thing. So I'm my wife's in the medical field. I know about a lot about cardiac and spinal things, just generally speaking, right? And I know that when I was doing the test before the challenge, Dr. Will pressed behind my spine where the discs start, and when I felt the fluid press and I screamed, it was like it felt like somebody pricked me with like something very, it was the sharpest pain I've experienced. And I knew without my arm in that, I know they had to be correlated somewhat. I know anything by the disc is very risky.
Yeah.
At that point, I'd started to realize that my game was up, and my mood immediately shifted towards watching who was around me. And then as we got back to the island, I sensed that this was not going to last because of that reaction. Once you touch somebody's back of their spine and there's fluid and it's by a disc and they scream involuntarily, or shout rather, that's not a good sign. I could hear I kind of knew at that point, I was, humble enough to understand that my time was limited.
Yeah, it's so hard. And I appreciate your honesty because it's such a hard thing to have experienced and gone through. And I especially like I feel modern day US Survivor is full of such big fans, you included, and to have the experience of Jeff coming out, removing you from the game, it's so hard. And the MRI that you have, just because there's 2 point question I'll ask, but the MRI you have, are you then how long is that in terms of leaving the beach to get an MRI? Because I know you're in Fiji. I don't know what the closest medical facilities are to you. And then once you've had the MRI, how soon after that are you cleared that it's not as maybe serious as they had thought?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So how I remember it was, and this is all very fast paced. I remember getting immediately. I remember the MRI scheduled for the morning, early in the morning. So I got there. They were immediately observing me. feeding me, making sure I was fed because I was obviously I lost about like 40 pounds, I think it was. I lost a tremendous amount of weight, I think, which was pretty interesting. And then I remember going into a room, I slept like a rock. I mean, it was like, I don't even remember taking a shower. I probably slept in the same clothes I went in. I was just immediate because it was the first time I was able to sleep
Yeah.
in a bed, you know what I mean? Since obviously since all that time. I remember waking up, they woke me up. We had an emergency. We flew to this hospital. And I remember the conversation in the hospital was that if the MRI came out negative, they were going to emergency helicopter me to Australia to have back surgery.
Yeah.
And they told me that they'll call my wife as soon as I before I get on the helicopter. So as I was getting in the MRI, I'm watching the amazing medics. I mean, phenomenal staff with CBS and all the medics. And they're on a conference call with neurologists and I come out the MRI and I'm like still like I would have made the merge, you know. And I'm like I'm still institutionalized from the game.
Yeah.
I remember I heard the conversation over like the fluid wasn't touching the disc and I don't need to fly to Australia and I don't they don't need to call my wife. And I was just like, whoa, like, you know, that's very serious. After that, they immediately put me on basically anti-inflammatories, and I immediately started therapy for
Yeah.
my arm. And they were monitoring, always checking in on me, absolute world class, you know, just attention to detail and service. And then it took me days. I would say it took me days to get the fluid once I started taking anti-inflammatories to lower that to lower the abscess in the back of my where the spine was.
Yeah.
The arm I was able to move my arm, I would say, in about 4 or 5 days. Just move the arm, get back feeling by constantly like pressing balls. But the strength of the arm took months. I mean,
Yeah.
it took me weeks and weeks. Almost, I would say around like a couple months before I got like full strength where I can actually box now, you know, in my garage and everything again.
Yeah. That's
There's no
pretty.
joke.
Yeah, that's no joke. That's hectic. And I asked those questions, so thank you for being so specific because I do have a specific follow-up question. Australian Survivor, since incarnation, really from about season two, they've implemented a 24-hour rule where effectively you can be removed from the game, get medical checks like you've had, and then if you are able to continue, you can come back. If you're not, you're taken out and removed from the game. Had you gone through all of those checks and the MRI came through the way it had, do you feel that you would have been able to return to the game within a 24-hour window had you had all those tests and were said to be okay? Or was it too far removed?
Phenomenal question. I'm actually getting this a lot on social media who are quoting this to me. And I think that here's the thing. I think the arm I think if I was immediately made to maybe rehab my arm, like immediately, if I was given something to, you know, keep on, I mean, to get my arm back to the where it was, I had to squeeze a ball. I had to put my arm up. I had to, you know, the lady was telling me what to do.
Yeah.
It was a therapy session. I don't know if I would have been able to re-get my arm control, but I still would have played with my
Yeah.
arm like that because I still have one arm, I still have two legs, and
Yeah.
I'm the type of player where you're gonna have to drag me out. I'd rather failed and drowned rather than that's just the way I am. Now
Yeah.
the abscess behind the back, that's a different ball game because as long as they would have cleared me to understand that it's not touching my disc and I have no fear of that, which would require an MRI. I wouldn't know. I mean, if they were able to do that in that 24-hour span and say, hey, listen, it's not touching, but you cannot sleep on anything hard
Yeah.
or else you are done. Like you're gonna create permanent damage to yourself. And I sign a waiver of some sort, like I heard that they do in an Australian Survivor. That would be a risk I probably would have taken.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, I don't know what it would have been a wise move, but I know how I am, and I came to play and I came to take risks. So I
Yeah.
would have signed any waivers, and I probably would have been swimming in circles in a water challenge because I have one arm.
Yeah. Look, Tyson won a season with one arm. So it's possible. It can happen. So yeah, it's such an interesting one for me watching US Survivor and Australian Survivor and seeing that just that loophole. It's such an interesting one where I do feel the evolution of US Survivor, and they definitely take way better care of players now, contestants. Like it's hard, it's brutal out there in terms of the food and everything else the condition you're under, but there is a level of care and respect and support. So it's such a hard shift. Just shifting game wise as well. Beware advantage. I know
Oh yeah.
you have this, and was there any conversations around passing that on to a Venus who you seem to have had a relationship with anyone else in the game, or was that just not a possibility in the time frame you had?
So good question. And yes, Venus was my alliance partner. I trusted her the most at that time,
Yeah,
right? A lot of people always ask me how that happened, and I would say, just ask the question, I can tell you. But to be respectful of this question, I think that at that point I respected her so much that I wanted to give her the advantage. I knew my time was up. I looked at my other teammates. I recognized that they were not going to they were going to have an easier time in the game than she. And I respected the reason why she was playing Survivor more than anything.
yeah,
So I wanted to, my effort at that time was to give her the beware advantage. We spoke about it. It didn't air, but I did speak to her about it. I'm like, do you want this advantage? I think you need it. I respect you, you know, the reason why you're here. And she said yes. Now the problem was is that this is kind of uncharted territory. Beware advantage has never been given to somebody in Survivor. So I don't know the rules, you know. So this was the impression, and I'm just gonna tell you this. The
yeah,
impression I thought was that I had to give the note, the parchment, to her in her hand, and then that would be, you know, the
right,
continuation. As long as she had the parchment, then it transfers to the person. That because that's the only thing I had on me, right? And I have already given her information. We shared once we made our bond in the game. I told her that I've made a specific design where the coconuts are in an X underneath palm fronds that are in an X next to a tree on the left hand side. So I will tell you this right now: if she finds that in the future, if she like remembers that, and I will, that would be the best thing ever for me to find out, and I would be so proud of her because I told her that she must know that there's the box is there, so she would have to remember what was on the parchment, and I showed her the parchment. But
yeah.
that would make my day. That would make my whole game if I found out that she remembered that and was able to uncover that idol. But yeah, it was her. I just couldn't in time because I could only say the universe did not allow me to.
Yeah.
As soon as Jeff got on that beach, I could not get to my blazer in time to give it to her, and I really wanted to. So if that helps.
Yeah, look, we've seen in historically with like medivacs and advantages. Like I'm thinking back to like Neil with Aubrey back in the day. Like there are times where things just don't necessarily allow for time and other stuff.
Oh yeah,
Like I look, I loved your relationship with Venus. I was very much Team Randon and Team Venus. I find Venus a really fascinating character. So I'm keen to see where her season does go. Hypothetically, had you gone to a tribal council, where do you feel like the six numbers votes fall? How do you think that transpires
yeah.
hypothetically?
That calculus is very interesting. This is where it gets. This is where winning is a curse,
Yeah,
right? Also because you just don't know where the lines are drawn.
yeah,
But I could tell you this. I could tell you up until that point of where we are in Survivor 46 that I the deal that I had with Venus was a very strategic one. That's just where we're very like-minded in how we think
yeah,
to a certain extent. And what I said was we're overthinkers and overanalyzing things sometimes to our own detriment. But my deal with her was I will go. Tevin was not very fond of her in the game. So I was going to work Tevin and have Tevin vote Soda. I
yeah,
needed everybody, and the reason why I wanted a Soda vote is because Soda failed my test initially when I got to the island, and I created a Parvati Light troll to test Soda's loyalty to me, to test just to see if she was even trustworthy
yeah,
with a light troll. It came back to me. Venus told me, and after that, I wrote Soda off in terms of an ally. I just tolerated kind of that situation. I love Soda, you know, beyond the game, but this is the game we're talking about. And I could not trust Soda, so my target was Soda. So I went up to V and I was like, Venus, my target is Soda. Will you vote Soda with me? Of course, Venus is gonna. We kind of came to an understanding on Soda, and I was trying to. The deal was, I take Tevin, I try to get him to vote Soda. Hunter will align with him with their alliance. Liz will vote with them with their numbers because Liz was very much into the Tevin Hunter kind of alliance, and she would probably just align with them. And I'm very confident we would have voted Soda out and not Venus, which was my goal to keep my alliance member. And then, but you know, sometimes Venus had other ideas. You know, she would come up to me and say, "I want to vote Hunter out," and
yeah,
I would say, "Oh, that's not really that's great. It sounds great. You
yeah.
know, it's like I want to vote out Jeff. You know, I mean, it's not possible. We don't have the numbers. The math and the calculus wasn't just added up." And I was like, that's why you see me in one of the scenes. I'm like, explain to me your perspective because I can't understand your perspective unless you. How are we going to get there?
Yeah,
And there's no mathematical way to get there.
Yeah, I actually I do vividly remember that scene, and I thought you handled that incredibly well. I remember thinking, gosh, he's handling that really positively. Because I feel like that sometimes as well in just life when people are talking. Do I see my perspective to see it? Yeah, I see it.
Yeah,
But
she said, "Am I blind?" And some teammates go back and forth, but I was like, "I don't know. I'm not blind. I'm just trying to have you do the math.
yeah, no.
Make it make sense."
Look, I'm aware we're at time, so I do have to let you go. Thank you. There are so many questions I could ask you. I hope for you, and we've seen this in the new version of Modern Survivor. We saw Bruce come back, medevaced. So fingers crossed that that might be something. Yeah, I think you showed and demonstrated enough on the show that you are a player. So hopefully Jeff realizes that, and at some point you might get your second chance to actually play and get through a full season on your own merit. So I'm sorry for how it ended, but I hope it's still a great experience.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, and I appreciate your time.